Really warm welcome to Conversations with Humanity today to Mr. David Gillman. David, how are you?
I'm great, mate. I'm very excited about being on your podcast today.
Yeah, I heard that. And I heard that this might be your first time on a podcast show. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Brilliant. Well, I'll tell you what, as I've said before to many people, I'll take it very easy on you today and we'll go step by step. And look, I'll tell you what I want you to do at the end of the show. Tell me how the experience was, because I've been in your shoes only once, of course, when I did my first podcast as well. So I'd really like to know what it was like for you at the end of the show today, rather than you just disappearing and everybody not knowing whether you actually enjoyed it or not.
One thing comes to mind, Mark, and it comes from Star Trek. I love watching Star Trek.
Yeah.
There's this great line that Leonard Nimoy has as Spock, and he says, "For everyone, there is a first time."
Ah, indeed there is, yeah. And you can take that in all sorts of different ways as well. David, we're going to about 103 countries around the world today in the podcast. So tell everybody whereabouts you are in the world today.
I am based in a little suburb called Sunbury in Melbourne, Victoria, in the country of Australia.
Well,
for those of you who do not know where Sunbury is, or Victoria.
Fantastic. Regional Victorian on the show today. Are you originally from there? Were you born and bred down there?
I was technically born in Glenroy.
Right.
And lived there for the first 6 years, and then moved to Essendon shortly after I turned, pretty much 7 years old.
Right, okay. Well, for many people around the world today, they will be noting that Melbourne has been in the news for not so good reasons of late, and in particular during these difficult COVID-19 days. But the news is getting better, David, down that way, I hear.
Yes, little by little. And I think, like many other people, we do remain hopeful, and we do cross our fingers that gradually we will crawl our way out of this horrible mess.
It is, isn't it? And people are very, like most things in life, people are pretty quick to blame others when things don't go right, as has been the case down there in the political world and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, it's up to all of us, isn't it? We've all got a responsibility to play our role, keep our hands clean, keep our distances, and do as we're told, basically, because if we keep away from each other for a while, then it tends to go away, doesn't it?
Yes, and we've got to remember to wear our masks.
Wear our mask, absolutely, yeah. We're not quite as stringent on that up here in Queensland at the moment, but have you got one there, have you?
I've brought one here.
Fantastic.
It's a bit scary, but I hope that it scares off the coronavirus.
I tell you what, hold that up again. I think I need to get one of those for the show, because it's is it a shark?
It's a shark.
It's a shark. Fantastic on my sailboat. I need to get one of those. I think I'll be running around here with a shark mask on. That'll scare a few people.
I love this one because it inspires me, and it inspires me to fight this virus like every good citizen of our country and of the world.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of the old World War II Kitty Hawks that used to defend our country.
Right.
And they were also the artwork of the Flying Tigers, which were a mercenary band that the Americans sent over to defend China during the Second World War.
Right.
And they were all designed with big shark's teeth.
Yeah, interesting.
So inspiring. And I still have a model in my collection with shark's teeth.
Very interesting. And Flying Tigers actually went on to become one of the largest freight distribution companies in the world. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, no.
And then soon later it became Federal Express, as we all know today, FedEx around the world. So Flying Tigers started off way back then after the war, and came out of the same conversation that you're just talking about there, actually. So
wow.
Very, very interesting stuff.
So I learn something every day.
Well, I learn something every minute of every day. That's how little I know, that's for sure. So let's talk about an opportunity I'm going to give you as your first time on the show, and it's something I offer to all my guests. Is I'd like you to dedicate your show today to someone special in your life. So who would you like to dedicate this show to today?
I would love to dedicate this show to every person who has lost their lives to suicide, struggled with bullying, depression, anxiety, people who are looking for hope out of the darkness of depression and hopelessness.
Fantastic.
But of course, maybe if I could be cheeky and dedicate it also to my parents and my wife Vivian,
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll let you sneak that other one in, but the first one is very noble, and great sentiment to be sending it out there at this particular time as well, where a lot of people are struggling, and I don't think we can do enough in terms of talking about hope and giving people support and love during these difficult times, because there's a lot of people out there that need it, and it's going to be a large part of this conversation today, I feel, because it's something that you and I share in common. I was very excited to have you on the show today because you're somebody that thinks and acts, more importantly, in these areas, and we need more doers in this world rather than talkers. So even though it's good to come on a podcast and have a chat about these things, it's also good to go away and actually put things into action. So let's start talking about that, because it's something that I wanted to throw across to you and talk about. You're obviously a person that's got a lot of compassion for others. When did that start in your life? Is it something that's new, or is it being something that's been handed down to you through your parents and things?
It's been a combination of humility, developing my own humility over time, my own learning about humanity over time, and yes, probably observing people down on their luck and having times when I've struggled as well. And nothing can really move you more than watching somebody helplessly calling out for help.
Do you think, from your experience, there's a lot of people that shy away from asking for help? Is that something that you can talk to personally in terms of, the fear of actually reaching out to somebody else to show your vulnerability?
Certainly, particularly as a 12-year-old. And this is one of the reasons why I wrote my book, which is the cover represented behind me today. Because when I was confronted by this originally, I was in my 13th year, and I was struggling with depression, even though I didn't even know the word. I knew I was sad. I was constantly sad, but I just wasn't interacting properly. I wasn't myself, and it's like a slow poison, and it works against you day in, day out until you snap. There's something that just comes up and just causes you to snap. It could be just a minor thing. So the saying goes, the straw that breaks the camel's back. And I was confronted by this. This happened to me as a 12-year-old, and I was alone. And I decided, no, I can't take any more. I cannot take any more of this. I am a lost cause. And I wrote a letter. I was in this state of mind where I was pointing the finger at certain people I couldn't get to and that I couldn't get through to. I explained why I was lost. I put it on a place on my desk, and I went to my parents' rumpus room. There was a gun safe there. It was locked, but I had a way of pulling the gun out of the case. I had my own little trick. Loaded the gun, proceeded to sit on the couch and figure out the best way to pull the trigger against my skull, which is not easy as a 12-year-old, because for one thing, the first thing you think of is, oh, I've got to put the gun out here where I might just be able to reach the trigger. My arms aren't that as big as, well, they weren't as big as they were when they were 12. I could probably do it now, and not meaning it as dark humour, but back then it was a struggle, and it was heavy. But at the same time, your head is throbbing, and I'm going, I don't want to do this. I don't want to make a mess of this. Why am I doing this in the first place? And you are having an internal struggle. Part of your brain is saying, this makes sense. I'm sick of this. I'm sick of the pain. I just want out. And the other part of your brain is saying, don't jump. Don't pull that trigger. Don't do it. Your head is throbbing. You can hear, in my case, I could hear my heartbeat. I can hear the blood pressure in my ears. My head's going. I know it's stupid to be doing this. By this stage, I knew gun safety, and I'm breaking every rule doing this. And all I can hope is, if I do finally take that leap off this depression cliff and I know nothing afterwards, I hope I don't mess it up, because if I do, I could be found as a vegetable. I could still be alive and be taken to a psychiatric ward and live the rest of my life as some kind of vegetable. What kind of existence is that? Eventually, I had an internal conversation And the conversation one, I basically said, put the gun away, unload the cartridge, put the gun away, get your life in order, tidy your room up. Let's restart again. Let's hit the reset button. And I did. And it was just this, it's like planting a little seed of hope, just one little seed. And hope can mean anything. In my case, I'll be honest with you, Mark, I was after vengeance. I was pushed to the edge. I had an apathetic headmaster. I had bullies that just seemed to get away with murder, and I couldn't get at them. I just could not get at them, and I did try.
Lots of things there to process, David, and the things that you've just shared. If I can go back and maybe ask a couple of questions around some of those actions that you took. First of all, as a 12-year-old, you're processing quite a lot of information there in terms of a deep psychiatric internal assessment, one could say, in terms of your own well-being. What was the call for the gun? Was there not another thought about just maybe running away? Like there's lots of different ways that one can deal with these sorts of things. So what was the attraction to the gun?
Gun was a very simple, quick and easy way to end my life. It was either that or slit my wrists. It was either that or pop a whole bunch of pills. Or jump in front of a train. Now, I do apologise when I'm saying these things. I'm not trying to encourage any of your listeners who may be struggling with this. Please, to your listeners, please rethink what I'm saying here. Do not do what I did. Seek help. But we'll get back to that later. But the gun was an easy way, relatively, to put a quick end to it.
Okay. I guess in terms of the bullying and everything, you talked about school. Was that the central core of where some of these actions were actually taking place?
I would say, in hindsight, a little over half of the problems. There was another problem, but there were actually two other major problems. I was dealing with the grief of a childhood unrealised. I did have a happy childhood prior to this period in my life, but it seemed like everything was changing. The universe was taking things away from me, and I couldn't get them back. All I had was this lovely, happy memory of two of my favourite pet dogs running around with me, a happy household, happy parents, and that was all just gradually fading away and being replaced by this nasty, horrible existence that I couldn't escape from, logically. What seemed like it was logical at the time. I think the other problem, I should say, was that I was suffering from a broken heart. I had my heart on a lovely young lady at the time, and she ended up going off with one of the bullies, or what seemed like at the time she walked away with one of the bullies right in front of me. Boyfriend, girlfriend situation. As I stated in my book later on, Mark, though, there was something that had happened that I didn't know anything about, and the tragedy that would have occurred had I pulled that trigger was that relationship didn't exist at all. I can explain that later on if you'd like.
Yeah.
Just to keep the story going for you. So there were essentially a few things going, yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? How we, and you know, there's a lot of talk around today in particular, and a lot of life coaching, a lot of support people around talking about these stories that we make up in our head, and there's a great example of what you just mentioned there, that a story had been created in your mind, that your lady friend was in a relationship with someone else, that it was something that was gloom and doom for you. But when we find out the facts later on, I'm just referencing this because it happens so often in life, doesn't it? We tell ourselves these stories, and we're fantastic creators in our own minds, and what rubbish we can come up with sometimes, aren't we?
It can appear as rubbish. I am starting to become more and more convinced as I'm learning a little bit about psychology. Although I'm not a psychologist or qualified in the official medical fields of psychology, I am learning gradually that we loop around in our problems. Our stories loop and loop and loop, and we become so ingrained in these stories that we don't have enough energy left to try and figure out a way to get out. We can't sort it out, and we don't have the energy. And what we want to do is go back in time, like Marty McFly in Back to the Future, and correct the problems. But our universe isn't created that way. We cannot go back in time, and we don't have a time machine. Not to any of our known sciences. So we are caught in that trap as well, and we can't resolve it. And this is possibly one of the big reasons why you have over 264 million people every year being reported with depression, according to the WHO website, the World Health Organization. And of course, depression is now seen as one of the main global factors for disease, because this can affect your physical health as well. And of course, you've got the medical, but essentially the medical industries, medical hospitals, clinics trying to look after all these people, either keep them medicated or give them some kind of counseling, coaching, psychology. Can you imagine the awful cost on governments to help finance over 264 million citizens all around the world with problems that can range anywhere from a broken heart to a broken business to a broken relationship? There are problems that seem so diabolical to the sufferer that it not only affects the sufferer, but the family of the sufferer. And those stories can actually confront family members and cause them to model and copy those same problems and those same symptoms that the original person is trying to cope with. It is like a mental disease. I have heard this is called a mental disease, this thing called depression, because it can transmit not by germs, but by thought.
How long's depression been clinically diagnosed for? Do you know?
I have no idea, and that is a good question. I would like to research that myself. But it can affect us at any time during our lives.
I ask you that because I go back to my grandparents' times, for instance, and I had my grandfather was my superhero. He was the guy that taught me how to build a treehouse and taught me how to drive the car and all those sorts of things. And in fact, when I was a little tacker, he used to put me on the driver's seat between his legs so I could hold the steering wheel, and he would change the gears and control the accelerator and the brake and the clutch, God forbid, because if I did it, we'd have a disaster. But so he was someone that I always held in high esteem in my entire life. And at different times, I used to feel sorry for him because I thought he was somebody that suffered in a depressive state at times. I thought he was a lonely man at times. And yet, when we look at it today, in today's era, in today's generation, we'd kind of say, well, yeah, he probably could be clinically proven to be, depressive. But back then, there was no such thing. And I was just wondering that all the things that we're talking about, and I certainly don't want to underplay them at all because they're all very serious things. But if we go back 50, 60, 70 years, wouldn't people be saying all these things that you're mentioning now are just part of life? They're part of what we are as human beings? According to what I've encountered so far in my 44 years on Earth and what I've learnt so far, it does seem to be the case. We are gradually evolving and beginning to learn and understand the basis and the core times when this all emerges. When a situation arises, somebody was confronted and they didn't have the answers to deal with the problem, and there was perhaps a loss. Something that was lost was dearly loved and it was gone. Maybe a life, maybe an item. It'd be akin to somebody breaking in and robbing your house and never being able to replace that item again, or certain items again, like family jewelry, something that had sentimental value. I think that the Second World War, even the First World War, where you have cases of people coming back, undiagnosed post-traumatic stress syndrome, it was called shell shock back in those days. Yeah. And from what I've learned through my dad, my grandpa Gillman, who served in the RAAF in Darwin in the Second World War, he was simply a mechanic. He was forced to work on aircraft night and day until that aircraft could fly. That could mean that he could be awake 2 days,
3 days, 4 days, 5 days straight, and they had to stay awake. These mechanics defending our country had to stay awake. Their only possibility of staying awake was an oxygen mask. About 10 minutes of that to just liven them up, get them back on the engines, get them back on the guns, get them back on the turrets. The problem is, and I hope I'm not too graphic, but this is one of the situations my grandfather was confronted with. Some of those planes went on 6 to 8 hour missions and came back terribly shot up. It was either flak or aircraft going up to intercept them. The stories my grandpa reported was that he was volunteered to wash out the rear turret. Without trying to be too graphic, it would mean that the rear gunner of a plane, or maybe the belly gunner of a plane, the gunner under the aircraft, was shot up so badly there was nothing left to bury them. They're just a mess. And my grandpa had to go up with a hose and wash them out. There were other incidences. I'm not going to mention what they were regarding what some of the situations were, but we believe my grandpa did come back traumatized. There was no counselling, no support. You were just expected to get on with your life in a civilian service.
Yeah, I think you're raising a really good point, and it's in reference to what I was saying. I think in terms of if we go back to that particular stage in human history, we find out that veterans were treated very differently to what they are today, and we're starting to realise now in today's society that veterans are underappreciated and under-supported in a lot of different areas as well, because of us now knowing what they went through, and these are all the things that you're describing. So do you think that through generations the amount of support levels in our society have changed proportionally enough to the numbers of people that need that support?
I'm convinced of it, yes. I am so convinced of it that I'm actually still seeing it as a tragedy. I am convinced that we have enough health workers now to look after every person who has currently died through depression, through suicide. I should say depression leading to suicide. We have enough around the world generally. Maybe some countries run a little bit differently, and less, should I say, other countries that are under a different government and under a different system may not do things the way we do in a first world country or even in a second world country. I would say that, actually, putting it in perspective, the World Health Organization reports that nearly 800,000 people are dying by suicide every year. In my book, I reported it between 1990 to 2016 as a total of 22,400,000, or just a little bit above that number, people dying just from suicide. What does that mean, though, in regards to cost? One life dying alone. You hear about it on a radio or a TV program, somebody dies via suicide. You might register it for a moment and say, oh, look, that poor family or that poor person. But it goes deeper than that, that the costs of having to rebuild for the family members, friends, associates, business people, colleagues. Great minds are being lost to this. We may have already have found certain cures to certain diseases by now that have still evaded us, because we've lost people to suicide. We've lost brilliant minds because they were bullied so badly, or they were confronted by such a disaster they couldn't get over it.
I'm hearing a man who's very passionate about this, and it's great to hear, and I'm really interested to know these numbers that you're throwing out there today, which I'm sure are theoretically researched and equivalent to what WHO is saying. So how do you evaluate things when you're told that, okay, we're in the crisis now of a global pandemic and X amount of people around the world are dying every day from that? And are you somebody that supports the notion that, hang on a minute, we've got other problems in our society where people are dying every day in greater numbers, aka suicide, than we are seeing in this global pandemic? Where do you sit on that one?
The numbers speak for themselves. I try to stick as closely to the scientific measurable numbers as I possibly can. I am not fully in the health profession. I am a life coach, but I am not, once again, involved directly with any specific clinic that is registered with the government. I just do life coaching. All I've got access to is what I can find on the web, certain reports that will spell out the numbers. Even if you were to go onto Wikipedia, which some people find, they struggle with Wikipedia as a source, but I still think it's a very reasonable source to go to. You can look up any number you want. You can look up who died from a certain disease, and it'll be on there. You can see who died from COVID. That was appearing. I actually checked that 2 months ago for a Toastmaster speech.
Yeah.
Just to see the numbers, just to add a little bit of content to the meeting. I think that the troubles we're being met by can be quantified by numbers, but each problem represents its own challenges, and each challenge presents its own answers. Some we may know, and some we're yet to discover.
Well, let's go back to a positive spin on this, because all of the audience that are watching and listening to you today are going to be very thankful that you didn't go ahead with your process back when you were 12 years old and you came through the other side. And I'm sure a lot of people are really interested to hear about your journey since then, and what were the shining lights that came out of it for you. What were your first steps away from that? You mentioned in the beginning that you thought of hope. You had a little bit of hope. What was that hope that was dangling out in front of you?
I wanted to live. I'm going to be brutally honest. I didn't write about this in the book directly, but my first seed of hope was revenge. What would happen if I survived this and made a success of my life? What would success mean? Well, I wasn't going to be able to do that if I was dead. You cannot do anything when you stop breathing. And when you lose your brain function, you can't do anything after that moment. So in my mind, I thought, right, I've got to live this. I want to see what I can do regardless. Wouldn't that just annoy everyone, frustrate everyone who's ever moved against me, to see me getting up there, to making my voice heard, to being seen, to be able to help people? Wouldn't that frustrate them? But first of all, I needed friends. I needed some form of support, a group. I felt at the time, up until that point where I had the gun against my head, I only had one friend. So I decided I would find all my friends from the very earliest days of school, the ones I could trust. And one by one over the years, I got back all my friends, all my kindergarten friends, and I've kept them to this day. For 40 years, we have remained friends now.
Terrific. Who was the first person you told about your situation when you were 12 that you were going to blow your head off? Who was the first person you went to?
I think I spoke to a few people. The one that jumps out of my mind, and it's very recent, is my fellow life coach. And I was working with my fellow life coach to do what we call a timeline. And it was part of the speech. I had to approach everyone with my speech topic, surviving suicide. And it was decided that I couldn't go into the room, deliver my speech, and become all emotional and uncontrollable. And I had to confront it. And this timeline strategy that we use in life coaching worked. I was able to come to terms with the past. It was almost as if I had a time machine, but this time machine I could distort. This time machine I could say, right, you lot who all caused me trouble, you got me back then. Now I'm going to get you. And I'm going to drag you in from the present into the future. And I'm going to make all of you count for something positive. Maybe even able to save somebody's life, maybe many lives, with what I've got, what I've learned.
So was this a relatively recent experience when you shared this for the first time?
Yes, this was in 2017.
Okay, so we're only talking 3 years ago. So you've been harvesting all that for that long. That must have been a very difficult process for you.
It was difficult, but I would use little programs, should I say. These are only self-developed prior to life coaching, where these were called coping programs, where I would trick myself into saying, one day I will get my revenge. I will get my revenge, and I will get them cold whether they like it or not. Now, this is controversial, what I'm saying. And since doing life coaching, I've shifted my belief system from revenge to help, to make a positive contribution, particularly before one day I'm discovered lying on the floor unconscious and I'm dead. If I can change people's lives, if I can save people from having to sit down at a table with an empty chair in front of them saying, that was my son, that was my daughter, that was my dad.
Yep.
He should be here. He's gone now.
Let's talk about that, because I think it's really relevant in terms of you moved the mindset from being a victim to being somebody that can actually make a difference. And I guess this is a good way to segue into the book, because it's really about, as it's named, rewriting the rules, right? And the rules for you back then was about, well, I'm actually being victimized here. There's these people in my life who I'm perceiving to be the ones that are damaging me, and I'm going to turn around and actually become victorious around that. Talk us through the idea behind the book on that.
The book was triggered by a certain number of events at the time. I had just begun my life coaching course, and I wanted to write a book, but I didn't know how. And I approached my life coaching instructor, a guy by the name of Rick Schnabel, and he stayed back with me after class one night, and he showed me exactly how to write that book in a way that would be easy to understand, not complicated, something would have a lot of metaphors and a lot of story behind it. The problem with books, and the books I've currently studied, they're great, but they have nothing to directly model. You don't have people's lives, people saying, right, this is what happened, and I decided to take this action to change my story and to change my outcome. Many people just go into the theoretical blocks of what you must do.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that I would love to have had a story at 12. And I'm sorry for going back in time a little bit, but going back as a 12-year-old saying, I just wanted to reach for a book quietly without no one knowing, flick through the book, not have it judge me, not be worried about being judged by a psychologist or psychiatrist for stigma, of being labelled as someone who's depressed. I just want a book that tells me what to do, somebody showing how it can be done and the proof. And in that book, going forward now into today, I basically lay it out. I say, yes, I nearly died. And I actually nearly died a few times. I was contemplating suicide all the way up to nearly the end of school. I did still suffer the stigma of social isolation. Even though I had groups of friends, like a little group of friends, I wanted to be accepted by everyone, and I couldn't.
So
that's
an interesting fact as well, in terms of it wasn't something that you really just clicked out of. It was something that was a journey. It was a continuation of evolution of yourself and getting stronger and stronger, I guess, to get to the stage where you felt as though you could take it head on and come out a winner. I want to go back to the positioning of a life coach in your life and how important it is for people who might be listening today who don't have a support figure around them. What did that association with that life coach mean to you? What was the support mechanism that life coach gave you?
Support mechanism that the life coach gave me was simply keeping the space open so that I could be heard. I could even be seen acting out my problems from the past rather than remaining hidden as a kid, silent as a kid, and not wanting to be found out for the troubles that I was going through and even be concerned with being made fun of. Life coach is trained not to do that. The life coach is there to say, okay, you spelt out the problem, what lesson can you take from it, and how can we use that to change your life from this moment onwards.
So for people that are struggling out there today and they're looking for that window of hope and inspiration, it could well be you on this podcast today talking about your journey. It could be somebody they talk to tomorrow in their life. Do you think it's a good idea for people to put their hand up and say, hey, I need help here? Or is it better dealt with alone in your own time? A lot of people say, well, when you're ready, you'll you'll find the pathway. Do you believe in that, or do you think that it's a case of, hey, I need to shout out here, I'm not well today?
The first thing that I must say openly about it, and encourage every listener and anyone who might be struggling with this, is it is okay for you to see or seek professional help. If you don't trust anyone around you in your immediate family, your friends, you can still see a professional, a health professional. I thoroughly recommend you do that. You will not be judged. You will not be labelled. These people are trained to help you turn your life around. You don't necessarily have to see a life coach. You don't necessarily have to see a counsellor, but see somebody that you feel somebody who can be recommended to you by a physician. I would say, if nothing else, and if you're still worried, reach for my book. Start off with a book. It's like if you go to a gym, you want to get fitter at a gym, you want to build your muscles. You don't go out and you pick up a 100 or 200 pound dumbbell and try and do 30 push-ups straight off. You'll kill yourself. You'll end up in hospital. You'll end up worse than where you started, and you won't want to do it. But in the case of a book like mine, book won't judge you. It'll start you off dead center where you might be. It'll approximate where you'll be, and it'll help you build your muscle up bit by bit.
Yep.
Like dancing, for example. I had a lovely old teacher called Cedric Mears, and he said, son, I can teach you anything you want. You've got to practice.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to practice. And actually my lovely teacher, Kerry Ward, who I still learn from, obviously with the isolation, I can't train from her. Kerry Ward said to me once in the very first lesson, she said, look, I've got all this information for you, but I can't just go ding and take it out of my tongue and put it in your mouth. You've got to keep working and building your muscles, your confidence muscles, for example. Yeah. And that's where, if you're struggling with stigmatism, you're worried about how you're going to be seen or judged, start with a book. Have that book waiting. Don't tell anyone you're reaching. Just grab that if you're worried and just quietly flick through it. Take notes. But in that book, I do thoroughly encourage that you do still follow up on professional help as well. Yeah. Nothing beats having a team behind you to help you pick yourself up out of the ground and get on with your life.
Yeah. No, absolutely right. I wanted to throw something else in the mix today because I knew we were going to be talking about this subject. I actually had my own suicidal experience, and it wasn't that long ago in terms of the context of my entire life. I'm 55 years old at the moment, and I just wanted to say that my pathway out of that very deep hole that I was in was actually caring for somebody else. So finding compassion and reaching out to be, I guess, a support mechanism for somebody else at a time when I was in my deepest and darkest hole. And that wasn't a conscious decision at the time. It was something that came to me subconsciously. It was like you had a flash of hope and light for where you were at. And I did exactly the same thing. And in fact, I was actually at a stage where didn't have the gun to my head, but I was sitting on the couch contemplating all the different ways that I could finish my life. And it just so happens that the TV was on at the time with a young person on a television show who was going through a much worse struggle than what I was in my life at the time. And I decided to reach out to that person and help them out. And that's what got me out of my hole. So I guess in terms of what I'm trying to, basically share here is that there's a myriad of different pathways, isn't there? And if you're not comfortable in seeking out a life coach or to read a book or to listen to a podcast, then there's other options available to you as well. And are there anything else that comes to mind, David, that you would suggest in terms of where people can go that are maybe not such traditional pathways?
Personally, I'm not sure, but one of the best resources we have in the 21st century that I didn't have access to back in 1988 is you've got the internet. You've got the internet, and that in itself, it's a whole library from the safety of your computer, away from prying eyes. Assuming, of course, you're very careful with your privacy. Assuming. If I wasn't sure of what I was to do, didn't know where to look, didn't know who to trust, or even if I felt like telling my normal medical physician after having my blood pressure checked about my struggles. I would look on Google, do a search, maybe even if you can think about the closest word that you are struggling with, the thing that is deepest in your mind, write it out on Google, do a search, see what comes up. But I would not solely suggest you rely on Google, and I've heard many health professionals say don't solely diagnose yourself on Google, but just open up the door enough so you can actually seek a direct medical professional practitioner to diagnose you. But at least get the ball running. The worst thing about this, Mark, is not being able to get the ball rolling, or not having even the energy. If you think about where you were when you were starting to contemplate suicide, and I can refer back to myself as a 12-year-old, we don't have any energy. We are barely coping, living the next minute or the next 5 minutes, or wondering how we can distract ourselves further from dealing with the outside world. That's where our minds are. We're not in the rest of the world with everyone else. And breaking out of that prison, and I refer to it in my book as a prison, that's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've hit the nail on the head as far as I'm concerned in terms of that personal isolation, isn't it? You go into an isolated state. You know, we think it's terrible now in lockdown, right? With people not being able to get out and do their daily lives. But when you're in that lockdown in your mind and the only thing that you're doing is literally breathing to get by, it's very difficult to think practically about, okay, I'm going to spend tomorrow searching the internet for all this positive stuff that's going to change my life around. It just doesn't happen like that, does it?
No.
Yeah. So let's carry on your pathway to brightness, because you started doing a whole lot of really interesting things in your life, and you've mentioned the word dancing once. I'm not going to let you get away today without telling us about your dancing experiences, but there's also some other fascinating things that you've done. So how about you go through some of those in a chronological order in terms of when they came into your life and what impact they had on your life journey?
Initially, I started my sporting career clay target shooting. How ironic. I had a gun in my head, and yet this very same gun went with me into the US so I could compete at the Grand American in Ohio in 1999. I actually borrowed a gun when I did my first shoot at 20, when it was 1996, but I took the very gun that I had against my head.
Wow. And
I competed on the international stage. I didn't win, but that didn't matter to me.
Yeah. How was that when you had that, I guess, recollection with that particular weapon? How did you view it? What was the relationship with it like at that stage?
I didn't give it too much thought. I never spoke to my parents about it, and my parents only discovered what had actually happened last year when I did my book launch.
Right.
And I don't really view the gun as a weapon. Unless you have a murderous psychopathic intent on using it on a fellow human being, it's not a weapon, it's a tool. And you use it to compete in sporting events, you use it to make friends. And I'm not saying that in dark humor, I'm saying there are so many clubs around the world you can compete at in clay target shooting in all manner of different fields. And I've met so many different people, and I still have them as friends, even in the US to this day.
How do you hit those things? I had a go at it once, and I couldn't hit that thing if I tried. It was just like they're too small. Why don't they make them bigger?
Sometimes I used to complain about that too, particularly when I was starting out. I regret to say that it wouldn't have been a very nice thing to see me almost doing my nut and not getting one target out of 10.
So tell me, though, one thing I'm fascinated in, you're the man who's going to answer the question. I'm probably not going to ask anybody else in my life this question. So when you do the clay shooting and you're standing there with the gun, the word pull is yelled out, right? Pull. And the clay pigeon goes off. Where did that word pull come from? What was the origins of that?
Do you know, Mark? I don't know, and I should have looked that up by now. But I think what pull initially means is I want you to pull the trigger, release the target, so I can pull the trigger and hit the target.
Okay. So I had a different understanding of it, because I saw the mechanism that releases the clay pigeon, and it kind of pulls back and gets released. So I was wondering whether it has something to do with that pull back and release action when you yell out the word pull.
I believe you're correct, Mark. And I think we still may have a device designed like that. Single target, single lever. You pull it back, holds in a spring, and then you release it.
Right.
And it throws the target.
Okay, cool. Yeah, my only one-time experience around clay pigeon shooting was with my uncle in New Zealand, who was a avid deer shooter. Bless his soul, he's not with us anymore. But he took me out to the firing range one day, and he said, "Right, I'll give you." I was only a little tacker, and he actually did it to frighten me of guns. So it was his way of actually showing me that how dangerous these things are, first of all, if they're in the wrong hands and they're not managed properly and you're not trained properly. So he put a 12 gauge shotgun to my shoulder and showed me how to fire it, and it nearly sent me back through the woods behind me about 400 feet when I fired it, and that was enough for me. I said, no more of this, thanks very much. And that was the end of my clay shooting career. But you actually got to go to the US and compete in some competitions. How was that? That must have been fantastic fun, was it?
It was awesome, particularly as the competition was being held in the US. It was midwinter here. Right. If I may be a little bit dark with the humour, the plane took off in the middle of a very cloudy, cold, windy day in Melbourne, at Melbourne Airport. And I don't mind admitting I might have given the middle-fingered salute as the plane rotated off the runway. And to be enveloped in this warm, lovely climate in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio, the birthplace of flying. And I love to remember that. It's birthplace of where the Wright brothers
absolutely.
Their plane.
Yeah.
And this lovely warm environment when it should be winter. It was the first time I'd ever been out of my time zone and been amongst total strangers who didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
Complete strangers. I do love Americans. I have such an appreciation for Americans. Whether people find that troublesome, I don't know. There are a lot of troubles over there, but really get to know Americans. If you really want to get a vast picture of ideology, just from one country alone, from 50 different states, go there.
Well, I can tell you now that the fact of this show is that my largest audience per head of population is from the United States, so I'm sure they'll be very happy to hear you say that you think they're all very lovely people, which they are, of course, especially the ones that listen to my show. So you had a great experience there. Now, what I'm interested about is when I look down your list of interests, hobbies, achievements, and all the rest of it, we go from clay shooting pigeon to dancing to karate to writing a book, being a life coach, and printing. Tell us about all these. How can you be so diverse there, David?
Ever since I found my energy, I just wanted to experience as much as possible.
Yeah, fantastic.
I can't pinpoint whether it was simply the realization that I nearly ended my life and realized that I nearly missed out on everything that I've lived through, appreciated. Traveling and dancing. Dancing particularly is like a language of its own. No words, just a communication of two people moving in union. It's one of the most wonderful things I've ever experienced.
Were you a natural when you started, or were you like me? Did you have two left feet and going in both in the different direction?
It took me 3 goes to go into a dance studio.
Right.
I wanted to be like John Wayne. My world was clay target shooting, not dancing. So when I finally had the courage the third time to push through the door, I walked in with a shooter's gait, head hung and shoulders. I'm a clay target shooter, teach me to dance.
Did you meet your wife dancing?
I met my wife dancing. That is a story to itself, which I've written in the book, I've shared in the book. But I did dancing. I converted from clay target shooting to dancing.
Yeah.
And the reason was there was a trigger point.
Yeah.
The 10-year school reunion I've attended. I didn't even want to go to it, but I attended. And I'm looking around at all my fellow students. They're all getting married, they're all having kids, and I'm 28 and I've done nothing. Oh yeah, I've competed and I've travelled, I've even gone to Egypt and experienced the great pyramids and temples of the old period. No wife, no girlfriend even.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, well, I don't want to do a dating. I don't even think we had a dating site or known dating sites back then. I could be wrong, but I didn't really look. But I thought, I don't do very well introductions. I need to do something that's traditional, something that I know might be a reasonable chance of finding my wife, or a girlfriend, or maybe 2, or 3, or 4. No.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to have to do it, Mark. It's for a clay target shooter to go into the world of dancing for the first time. It's and I mean no offense to the demographic of your listeners, but my mindset back then was it's sissy. It's just for sissies, and I want to be like John Wayne. I initially wanted to do clay target shooting so I could meet my wife there, and you know she might be with a checkered shirt and a ciggy, half dragged ciggy outside her mouth, and she might be cute. I ran out of luck there. It didn't work, so I had to go dancing.
Right. And how long was it? How long was it into your dancing journey that you met your wife?
It was 3 years initially.
Right. Okay. So you had to put in the hard yards. Yeah. Was no overnight success on the dance floor.
And the first dance I asked her for, she turned me down.
Oh, she turned you down.
Turned me down. I thought, oh, you snob. Oh, yeah, you can dance with all these great dancers that have obviously got 10 or 15 years experience, but I'm not good enough for you. Right, I'm going to competition and I'll show you who can dance.
Right. Okay, so you kicked into it again.
This was the story.
You kicked into it again.
This was the story in my mind that I was telling myself. Now, I did not know Mark until much later when I met up with her again at another social a few years afterwards, after I started competing. Yeah. That she was in a bad spot.
Oh, okay.
And she did not want to be around anyone, any strangers or anyone. She had broken up with a boyfriend. She just wanted to be amongst her friends. I didn't know that. I took her for just stomping me off. So, long story short, I just had just casual dances with her. I mean, I thought she was pretty cute back then, of course, but I didn't really think anything of it.
Yeah.
And then just one Easter, everyone else is on Facebook and saying, oh, I'm having Easter with my wife and my girlfriend, or my little bub and all that. And here I am sitting in my bedroom going, I got nowhere to go.
Right.
Look up my friends on Facebook. Oh, there's Viv. Okay, I'll ask Viv if she wants to go out and we'll just have a hot drink or something.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure, okay. It wasn't, I mean, I say it wasn't a date. She claims it was a date. And it just took off from there, Mark.
Fantastic.
And so whilst having my relationship started with Viv, I started a new dance relationship. Like this is a non-romantic relationship. It's just a partnership with a lovely young lady by the name of Jackie Clark, who could not find a bloke for a dance partner. Mm-hmm. And I just lost my previous dance partnership, and I asked her, would you like a dance, Jackie? No one was dancing with her, Mark. She was just sitting there at the table on her own.
Yeah.
No one's dancing with her.
Yeah.
Thought, right, come with me if you want to dance. I was putting on a bit of a Terminator. Come with me if you want to dance.
Yeah. The bravado was there. Okay.
The bravado was there, but I felt a little sorry for her.
Yeah.
And my teacher has said, look, she's looking for a dance partner. Would you like to have a tryout with her? Sure, okay. Lovely lady to dance with.
Yeah.
She accepted my request for a dance partnership. 3 months later, Jackie had only danced 2 dance sport championships with me. Mm-hmm. We got to the Australians. We were in 3 events and we won all 3 in a day.
Wow. There we go.
And thus we became 3-time Australian dance sport champions in a day.
Wow. Hot to trot. There you go. Did Vivian kick her out and replace her as your dance partner after that, or what happened there?
No, I stayed on with Jackie as long as I could.
What a fantastic story.
We both had a thirst and a hunger to learn. and to build our dancing muscles. Jackie may have had different reasons than I did. I just wanted to become better. I'd made this terrific journey, paid heaps and heaps and heaps of cash.
Yeah.
Jackie had just lost her husband. They divorced.
Right.
And as the years went on, the dancing made it possible for Jackie to find her future husband.
Wow. Isn't that extraordinary? Like, the whole way through the conversation today, it's been about, the sunshine comes out of the darkness, right? There's always the light that comes up, and everything that you've talked about today, we've rushed through the time. It's gone so fast on the show today because you've been fantastic in just giving us this. Before we head off today, I wanted to spend a few minutes sending out some hope and some support to those people that are struggling. I'm going to put all the contact details of David in the show notes today of the show, and to get a copy of David's book. David, would you be open to giving away a copy of your book to one of my listeners today if we get somebody to write in a good story to us about how they're feeling at the moment?
By all means, Mark. You just tell me where to send it and I'll send it.
Fantastic. Sorry, I didn't want to put you on the spot there, but I just thought it was a great idea, and I've loved your story today, and I just think it'd be a really valuable thing for someone out there who's listening or watching the show today. Write in and tell us why you should get a copy of David's book and how you can relate to it, and we'll get you a copy off. In fact, I'll send all the notes that I get to David. He can make the decision on who should get the book. And he might even sign it and send it out to you as well. So there we go. But before we head off, David, tell us, if someone's out there, they're struggling today, it may be because of COVID-19, it may be because of bullying at school. There's a whole host of reasons why people might be feeling alone and objective today. What can you say to them right now?
Never give up. This comes from a 12-year-old who nearly died by his own hand. Don't give up. Even if you have to pull it the tiniest little thread of hope, do it. You don't know what difference you can make, not only to your own life, but somebody else's. Maybe many people. You might just be the person who made that difference. Yeah,
fantastic. What a great way to finish today. Now, I'm going to say on top of that, because I just got to try and share something as well as David has there from an inspirational point of view. Get your dance shoes on, everybody. Get out there and go dancing. You never know how it's going to change your life, right, David?
That's right. Except in Victoria, we are still separated in isolation. Okay. I do apologise to your listeners. In America, I think they have the same challenges at the moment.
Yeah.
But once this comes off, once we get on top of this problem, once there is a proven vaccine that we can be immunised against this terrible disease, get in there, guys. You don't know what you'll learn from it, but you will learn heaps, and it'll be such a great benefit for you. Your dancing, if you learn to dance, your connection skills will go far and wide, even into your working lives, into your family life.
That's beautiful.
Learn to read body language.
And you might find the love of your life, right, David?
You might find the love of your life, and you might help somebody find the love of their lives too.
Yeah, that's a nice story too. Yeah. David Gillman, thank you for being on Conversations with Humanity today. I've really enjoyed our time together, and thank you for being so raw and honest and transparent with your journey. I'm sure you've helped many people listening to the show today. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me, and thank you, listeners, for listening to my story. I hope it helps everyone who has listened to this podcast today. Now, I'm not going to let you go without telling me, what was your first podcast experience like? I told you at the top of the show that I was going to ask you. Did you enjoy yourself? Absolutely loved it, Mark. You're an absolute professional. It was like, honestly, I'm not going to yoink your string or anything there, but I've listened to a lot of Alan Alda's stuff. He's got a podcast of his own. Yeah. And it was like almost having a conversation with him. Wow. It was that good. Very easy to converse with you. Fantastic. Well, thank you for that feedback, and I appreciate it. And we'll make sure more people get to listen to your story, because that's the more important side of it. So thanks again, David, and we'll catch up again soon. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me.